So welcome back. As I mentioned in the previous video, the trick I'm always trying to do is I'm trying to make it easier for my future self. So you have to imagine when you're doing projects. I've had projects where I did some stuff and I had to fix a bug half a year later. And you may not really believe it now, but you can imagine if you have a project that is several hundred lines long in total, and you've worked on for several weeks, and then uh, you put it aside for a long time. No matter how good it is, it's going to be kind of difficult to read it back again. So there are a couple tricks to make it easier for yourself, and I'm gonna go through them in the order I think is the most applicable. The first one is to try and give everything good names. And I'm actually gonna give an example how you could give stuff bad names. You could give, you say, instead of saying config email credentials, I could have called this A and this B and this C, and I could have rewritten everything so it would have been fine and it would have worked, you know. But then I would come back, and then I would see config A, config A, config A. Email address would be B, B, C. You know, what does this mean, right? This would take considerably longer to read and to understand than, oh, in my email credentials, I want the email address. And I'm sending the same email address to both my username and my receiver. My password is my email credentials password. Oh, that makes sense, right? And if I had left this out, right, and all the others, well, that's wonky. If I had left all those out, you can imagine it would also be more difficult to read. So I try to give everything very clear names, and it's going to actually be very difficult. There's functions where I was making, I've made managers of, for platforms, and I it took me, I take 10 minutes to give a function a good name because it would be a name that would be defined or will be used throughout the project. And giving it a good name makes it a lot easier for yourself, but also for others to understand what's happening. So that's the first thing. I'm gonna just write a list. So list documentation. It's a text file, yes. Don't add it. One, give everything clear names. And there are plenty of conventions out there which you can read up on. I would suggest googling pip8, pep or pip8. Let me check. Pep8. Yes, there you go. Pep8. If you read that, that already makes everything 100 times easier. The next thing is that I like to add doc strings. So in PyCharm, what you do, you type in 3 times the double quotation marks and then hit enter at the start of a function. And it'll type out everything for you. So I'll describe what it does. Send an email from username to the receiver with email text as the text. And then this I can say string, string, and a string is basically just, this is a string, right? It's a bunch of words or letters in between quotation marks. This is also a string, and this is also a string, and it doesn't return anything, so I can just get that out. And I'll say the text to be sent, the person to send it to, the person to send it from, and the password used to log in for username. I can actually leave it out. So, and this is typically a lot of work, and it's very boring work. So what I do is whenever I start a new project, I force myself from the start that every single function I write, I add this and I maintain it. Because if I don't, I know I'm gonna slack and I'm gonna do it less and less and less until in the end you're not doing it at all, right? And you don't have to be extensive, right? One line here and just a quick description. And usually these will be come back in multiple functions, so you can copy paste them, so that saves time. But you have to do it consistently, because if you slack, you're gonna let it go. You're gonna end up not doing it. So I really suggest, be strict on yourself and always add doc strings. You're boring, but useful. You're gonna be thankful for yourself in a year's time. So I'll add it here. To add, all right, let me be consistent. Add doc strings to your functions and also classes. But we haven't discussed those yet, so I'll leave that out for now. Next thing you can do, you can add comments. And for instance, you can say login to your email. Right? This doesn't really make sense to add it here because all these parameters have been explained correctly. But if you have some fancy list comprehension, it may actually be worth adding some explanation on what you're doing, right? You could say here, this program is really too short to explain really how to do this, but you can say, for instance, here, load the config file, right? And I personally don't use comments all that often. I think having good names for your functions and your variables takes away the necessity for that. However, if something is very difficult, or you couldn't find a good name for your function, or there's situations where you really, if you're uncomfortable with something, it's better to have too many comments than too few, right? So I'll add it here to the documentation list. 3, add doc strings. That doc strings, I mean comments, of course. Comments. So, and I think the last thing to make it easier for yourself is the README. You can add a description of what this does. So send an email from the from the email address specified in the config to itself with the text good morning, have a great day, right? This is most people will skip the README, but you should still have it, okay? I think that kind of covers most of the options. Have a README. That covers the most basic ways, the most important ways of documentation. I think the most important thing, however, is to always be consistent. Consistent means, for instance, here in send email, I have an empty space behind my doc string. For instance, here in my list documentation, I always have a capital letter at the start of my sentences, and I don't have any full stops. Being consistent means that every program I do, I start with this structure, where I load the config and I pass it to my main, and I have the main function here, and I pass it on, and I just do my stuff. And that I have the same folder layout, because the more consistent you are, the more used you're going to be. It's like reading a book, right? If you have a front cover and you read from front to back, it's going to be much easier than having a book where you kind of have to find the pages because the page numbers aren't in order, which may be a weird way of explaining it, but I think it gets the message across. So I would suggest practicing with this. Try to give your variables good names. Try to have doc strings. Add comments where necessary, and if you're doing a big project, add a README. Good luck, and I'll see you around next time.